is a reason my cat is named after him. Plan accordingly. At least in my opinion. Was okay. It should be up for critique, right? Hey y'all, it's Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today. And for this video, we're going to be doing my March wrap up. Alright, so before we get into anything bookish, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments, what do you think was the most popular book that you read in March? So apologies that this video was a little delayed. My pup Faith passed last week, and so it's been a little rough around here. Time to officially dive in, close out March. So starting at the top, let's dive into the stats. In March, I read 21 books, and across those was 5,022 pages. That is actually the best page count we have had so far this year. This does include converting audiobook hours, 2 pages. However, we were just shy of 65 hours. I did have an average rating of 4.12 stars, which is fantastic. And luckily, I only had 1 DNF. Looking now to my genres, I had 2 fantasy books this month. Majority of my reading was done in manga. I read 14 manga, and yes, I will say, like, manga isn't necessarily a genre, but like that's how it's listed on my spreadsheet tracker, so that's what we're going with. I read 1 nonfiction book. I also read 1 romantasy, and then I read 2 sci-fi. As for the little goals I keep for myself, I did obviously read a nonfiction book as well as a manga, and then I did read a book that was more than 500 pages. Plus, my series tracker isn't the best this month. I did unfortunately start into 8 new series, though I did read 6 continuations. I finished 3, and then I did make the decision not to continue with 2. And then last but certainly not least is the number of books I read from my own TBR. I do wish this number was slightly higher, but I did at the very least read 4 books off of that list. So as per usual, I'm only going to be reviewing books here that I didn't read for dedicated videos, which I had a fair few of those this month actually. I had my feminist reading vlog, returning to 5-star authors, as well as 2 manga vlogs. And then I had a vlog where I was trying to close out the fantasy subreddit bingo board from 2025. It was clearly a rather busy month, but let's go ahead and dive into the books that I read in March. I'm going to go through these chronologically just to kind of make things easy. So starting at the top, kind of a random mood read I ended up picking up was The Entanglement of Rival Wizards by Sarah Rosh. This is the first in her magic and romance series. It's definitely a cozy fantasy world with a very heavy focus on the romance. So I did label this as romantasy, and I really enjoyed it. We start out following these 2 men who are in graduate school actually in this fantastical world. We have Sebastian, who is from the evocation department, and he is the first of his family to actually choose going the education route over the military. He is a human. On the opposite side, we have Elfior, who is a half-elf, and his family is actually this group that's very much like a defense contractor because they are from these 2 competing magic departments, and inherently who they are and their personalities, they have been butting heads for years. And at the start of the book, they're actually up for the same grant. However, unfortunately for them, both of their projects are really basically the same thing, but in their own magic departments. So they actually both end up getting the grant, but this means they have to work together. And initially it is the absolute worst, but they do start to learn that maybe they have misjudged each other and maybe they're not so terrible as they have come to think. I really liked this. It kind of, I'm not gonna lie, this definitely itches the same thing for me that fanfiction does. And not to say fanfiction can't have phenomenal character work, but this definitely did have some really phenomenal character work for characters that are obviously original. Part of that fanfiction feeling may come from the world itself, because I really liked this balance between a contemporary fantastical society where some elements are so normal, like Seb takes public transport to get to school, but there are occasional little starts to the chapter that'll be like, hey, transport might be shut down because unfortunately troll that is asking everybody this riddle and he's not letting anybody pass until the riddle is solved. There's been numerous different parties that have been sent out to try and handle this situation. Plan accordingly. And I really enjoyed that. It was so much fun. As a big fan of the enemies to lovers trope, I did appreciate the dedication to that was done here. It didn't feel like these 2 instantly switched and suddenly changed their perspectives on one another. And with that, it really allowed some great exploration of both of their backgrounds, which was, again, really well done. It made them both be very convincing as characters. It really helps them hop off the page. And then it allowed me to become so much more invested in the romance between the two of them. However, I will say the highlight of this book is actually Sebastian's best friend and roommate, Orok. He is my all-time favorite. That man is a treasure and he deserves to be treated as such. I cannot wait to get my hands on the next book in this series, which is his book. Obviously, I did have a lot of fun with this one. I'm definitely going to be keeping it on my shelves, which is why it has already been annotated to heck. It was so fun. It was swoony, a little spicy at times. Plus, there was also some really interesting trauma that was explored, specifically in Sebastian's background. And I actually really liked how the author ended up resolving that situation in the final chapter. This does have an epilogue, happily ever after situation, but it feels like it makes so much sense for the story that was laid out here and the characters that we have been following. This one was such a big 5 stars. Next up, as a part of my book club that I host over on my Patreon, the Geek Squad, we have been reading the Lord of the Rings series. And so in February, technically, we were reading The Two Towers by J.R.R. Tolkien. I officially finished it out at the beginning of March. So this is the second book in the series where we are continuing to follow the Fellowship of the Ring. However, unfortunately, the group has been separated and there is a lot of unfortunate elements they are now having to deal with as they attempt to take this evil ring to the volcano in Mordor. I did like this, but of the 3 books, I felt like I found myself dragging the most with this one, unfortunately. I appreciated the alternate perspectives we got to see here, but with that, I felt like there was a little too much focus on, namely the nth characters, these giant speaking, walking trees. While there are elements of them that are very interesting, it's just, there was so much, and I did not care enough about it, especially given that a lot of the elements that are there don't really impact much of the plot moving forward. I did like getting to learn a little bit more about certain characters like Merry and Pippin, even though in the films, they're mostly utilized as comic relief. In the novels, I actually feel like they do get some good character work and they also get some good action as well. There's also a bunch of politics in play here as the group is trying to garner some support from other villages, from other kingdoms. An interesting aspect that I did not know about this one going in is that, I guess, backtracking. So the first book in the series is actually technically book 1 and book 2. This is book 3 and book 4. Book 3 is purely focused on like the group that has been separated off. And then book 4 is focused on Sam and Frodo, which I didn't know. So that was kind of an issue for me, is that the 2 stories felt so separated, so that whenever there was dragging in book 3, I think if we had been alternating back to see Sam and Frodo, that may have helped with my investment in the story, because once we returned to those 2, I was pulled in. I was much more engaged, especially whenever we got to see them interacting with Gollum. I think adding this extra character who you're very unsure of like what his motivation, well, okay, no, you know what his motivation is, but you don't know where his loyalties lie. And that made for some really interesting moments between Sam and Frodo. Also, I highly recommend listening to the audiobooks of these. I listened to the ones performed by Andy Serkis, and given the fact that, you know, he voices Gollum, his Gollum was fantastic and really immersed me into the story. I do think this is probably my least favorite of the series, I'll be honest, but even still, this was like a 3.75 stars. I still enjoyed my time overall. Next up, I closed out the Molly Southbourne series with the Legacy of Molly Southbourne by Tade Thompson. This is a horror sci-fi novella series following Molly, who, whenever she bleeds, a clone is created out of her, and that clone tries to harm her. I was super into the first 2 books in this series, and at the start of the 3rd one, I was just as much, but unfortunately, I feel like the ending is a little lackluster. Throughout the series overall, I felt like the themes that are woven into this have been really well done and presented in some very interesting ways. There's some philosophical discussions, especially around identity, that keep coming up, and I always really liked what Thompson presented with those. That was definitely the same with this last one. There were even a few twists and turns that the story ended up taking that I did not see coming, and I was pleasantly surprised by that. But the ending itself feels very abrupt. And then there's an extra epilogue chapter where you get some answers which were outstanding, but it's kind of in a way where it feels like, I know you're going to still be asking about this, so I'll tell you, meaning it's not really satisfying to figure out like what that answer is. I also sort of felt like with this one, the story got a little bit too big for a novella, especially given the numerous different avenues that were starting to unfold in this final one. It felt like there just was not enough time to really explore each of them and work them out in a way that, like I said, was satisfying and had a actually decent conclusion. So unfortunately for this last one, I did drop it down to about 3.5 stars. Overall, I do still think this is a pretty interesting series to check out. And like I said, they're novellas, so they're really fast reads. Just maybe be aware that the endings are not the best, at least in my opinion. Next up, a different book club that I partake in is the Book Dragons Book Club, which is hosted with some of the other hosts from the Dungeons and Book Dragons Readathon, which we hosted in November. And we ended up starting the year with The Spite House by Johnny Compton. This is, I guess I would say, kind of a Southern Gothic horror story where we are following this father and his two daughters who are on the run. And the father ends up getting the opportunity for this job where they will be staying in this super haunted house, and he just has to record the experiences they have while there. But it ends up being a little bit more than they're anticipating. This was okay. I really wish we had more focused on the father, Eric, and his two daughters, but unfortunately there were so many different perspectives that we explored here, and many of them I felt like were either repetitive, completely unnecessary, brought up questions that didn't really end up getting answered, or like I said, covered the same ground but like with a different character. So I guess that just rounds back to what I was saying about being repetitive. I did think the horror parts were a little creepy. Another one where the ending just wasn't really satisfying to me. Overall, I did for the most part like stay engaged with the story and was intrigued about where things were gonna go. So this was like a 3.5 star as well. I wish I would have liked it more, but I definitely think some of those perspectives really just needed to be cut out. In actuality, maybe this would have worked better if it was a novella. Then next up, I did close out the Lord of the Rings series with my book club. We read The Return of the King in March, and this was really good. This was really good. We did return to the alternating perspective with book 5 and book 6. And again, like, I don't know if I like that necessarily. I do think there could have been some benefit in the pacing if we had alternated in chapters back and forth, as opposed to like the entire books alternating the perspectives. That said, there is still a little bit more politics going on here, but there's also a lot of action. I also appreciated some of the character work we got to watch be explored. As far as a certain romance that happens, I have very conflicting feelings about it. And even then, like, I have conflicting feelings about mentioning my conflicting feelings, given the fact that, like, obviously the series is not a romance. That is not the focus of it, but the romance is there. So like, I feel like it should be up for critique, right? Again, really impressed with the work that was done around Merry and Pippin. Like I said, did not anticipate that after watching the films, but I actually really liked them in this last one. I really liked the roles that they played. And this one also solidified the fact that Sam is truly like the best character. There is a reason my cat is named after him, because everybody deserves their own Samwise Gamgee. Like, he is just the best. I think this one does have one of my favorite songs of the series. I don't know if I can necessarily thank Tolkien or Andy Serkis's performance for that, but one way or another, it was really well done. It was one of the grief songs. I do have conflicting feelings about how this book ends. In the second, I kind of found myself missing some of the cozier vibes that we got in the first book, which is definitely something I don't really see myself saying very often, seeing as I'm not the biggest cozy fantasy person, but I really liked those vibes in the Fellowship of the Ring. I was missing those in Two Towers, and though there is a return to them in Return of the King here, I don't know if I necessarily like how they're done, because it feels like it drags out the end of the story. And I don't know if I super think that was necessary, but I understand the importance of it because I think it helps showcase the grand scheme of everything we have just watched unfold for the world and the impacts everything have had in their universe. So again, kind of conflicting feelings. Even still, I was really sucked in the entire time reading this one. I was really hooked. I was very engaged. And I did, again, have so many positive things to talk about with it. So this one was also a 4-star. Overall, I would probably say this series was a 4-star series from me. It's not a new favorite necessarily, but I definitely understand why it gets so much love. And it is so impressive, the amount of detail in this universe. And last but certainly not least, is a nonfiction book that I have finally finished, which was Men, Women, and Chainsaws by Carol J. Clover. When I initially picked this up, I was actually thinking it was going to be used for my feminist reading vlog earlier this month. However, I don't think it actually 100% would have worked for that. This is discussing gender in horror films. While it does say modern, this was originally written in the 90s. So it really is more exploring gender and themes around gender in slasher films during, I would say, like the 70s and 80s. Across the board, this was just super interesting. I really liked how Clover would present some of her topics and then explore those through the different films she was analyzing. It's definitely a pretty academic read. Like, this did take me some time because whenever I would sit down to read it, I just really was having to keep my brain engaged and work my way through it. Sort of a flashback to college reading experiences, I won't lie, but I was also enthralled the entire way through. There definitely were some chapters in this where feminism should be included in the conversations that were going on here, but on the whole, I don't think that's really what the book was super focused on, which is why it ended up not really working for that video. But along with talking about gender in these films, I also was just really fascinated about people's viewing experiences of these stories. And while I definitely think there are some avenues that weren't explored here that might have been really interesting, for example, looking at like the race of the viewer, but I was pleasantly surprised to find that there were some chapters which did dive into sexuality and the role that may play in some of these films, the presentation of it, and people's analysis of them. There were numerous works cited that I do want to do some research into myself now as well. Plus, there's a list of all of the films that were referenced at the end of this book, and I do want to start making my way through some of those. Like I said, this was really fascinating. I'm so glad I finally got around to finishing it. It did take a while, but it was a really interesting read, especially if you like analyzing pop culture or horror. I think this is a must read for you. I cannot imagine giving this anything less than 5 stars because I've already found myself thinking back on this book when consuming horror stories now. Like I think it was in my second manga video where I actually mentioned Uzumaki, and there was a chapter here where like I could see a connection there that I wouldn't have thought about previously, but again, that's the impact that this book has been having on me. All right, and on that note, that is officially it for today, y'all. So thank you so much for coming to my channel. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. You were really desperate for attention today, huh? And I guess with that, let's say if you made it all the way to the end of this video, let's leave the cat emoji with the heart eyes down below. I have links to all my socials as well as a few ways you can support me down in the description. I come out videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!